And if you still have no idea what the show's about,
the constellations are carved in the ground.
let's go to where the story takes place. Orere Point, a small coastal village, a hamlet if you will. With just one road that leads into the village, it remains a quiet place in the quickly growing Auckland city. Situated on the eastern coast of the Hauraki Gulf, New Zealand. Far, and I tell ya, what a bloody mongrel of a time I had finding info on archives or any historical content. Many months later, while reading from an old book of the area which a local loaned me, whose grandfather had written, I would find out this was because roughly a century ago, the area went by the name Taupo. The history and legends of the western coast of the Hauraki Gulf, written by Henry Ashby. Quote, there is evident proof that this area at some prehistoric time was thickly populated. There is not a suitable piece of land for cultivation in any of these parts that has not been made use of. On the creek flats, the great heaps of stones that have been piled up by human hand, and the remains of ancient drains in the low-lying and swampy areas bear witness of what once was. Within a 2-mile radius of the Orere Hall, there are the remains of what were once very large paths or mouldy fortification. The oldest mouldy of my youth had no history or knowledge of who occupied them, and before our forests were destroyed, I have seen very old trees growing in the trenches surrounding these paths, which proves that much water has flowed down the Orere since these paths were occupied. I'd like to share 2 points, and which I believe are still valid till this very day, from Reverend Richard Taylor, from his book Te Ika au Maui, written in 1870. Quote, the age of New Zealand. 1. That man in fact in those regions stands on a more ancient platform and is surrounded by far more ancient forms of animal and vegetable life than even his grand progenitor Adam did at his creation. And 2. That New Zealand is probably the oldest surface of our planet remaining, still preserving, with little change, its primeval condition from not having been submerged with the rest of the grand southern continent. End quote. It's rare to cross paths with another human while walking this small northeastern stretch of coast. Must have been one hell of a wave to have cloaked the pre-existing earth with that thick of a deposit, is what runs through my mind each time I go for a walk this way. Walking along here has become a bit of a routine for me, especially after a storm, me eager to get down there to monitor the slips and scan the shoreline. It's an interesting wad of earth that's been deposited here. Looking up at the mass of this constantly slipping face can be quite intimidating. It must have been dumped abruptly, and I can only imagine it came with cataclysmic force and would have made a hurrah of a noise. With its many layers exposed, it's possible to see the volcanic eruptions that have happened between then and now. The northerly swell that comes through the gates of the firth make a decent wave, which constantly undermines it, and over the past 5 years, I've seen it develop deep cracking up the top, all the way to the bottom, and then lose thousands of cubic meters in just one of these slips. Every once in a while, I've came across some interesting items. These which have made it to the surface, where over time the material is sifted and sorted by the course of nature and its relentless sifting motion. The different weighted rocks get separated out of the silt, sand at the bottom. The caramel-coloured clay body floats back and forth with the tides, just under the surface, eventually becoming sediment of the seabed. I have a hunch that the ruddy red material takes the currents out even further. However, I am a geologist, so along with tying written accounts of history to the confusing shuffle of place names, this can only be speculative on my behalf and not an objective truth. Another fascinating key point I'd like to make would be that Oriri Point has not always been a coastal village. It was once very much inland according to the data on this geographical map. At its peak, 16 to 18,000 years ago, the sea was about 120 metres lower than it is today. At that time, much of the seabed around the New Zealand coast was dry land, and coastal plains extended across what is today the inner continental shelf. It would have been roughly a 24-hour walk to the nearest coastline, which was then about 90 kilometres away, or let's say 3 days of walking, 8 hours a day. And so we're on the same page. This was in the Pleistocene. Pleistocene epoch. It is often referred to colloquially as the Ice Age. The epoch began about 2.6 million years ago and ended 11,700 years ago. According to the International Commission of Stratigraphy, it is characterized by widespread glacial ice and the advent of modern humans. Given the information I've gathered and compiled, it's fair to say that the quiet coastal village of Oriri Point was evidently a lofty highland home of ancient giants, huge in stature. These stands of coniferous tree attaining heights of up to 200 feet with a circumference of up to 40 feet and a very gradual diminution of size upwards of 100 feet without a single branch. These surround the steepening north face of Kohukohunui of the Hunua Ranges, where below remains an extinct volcano from a much earlier period. The Kauri itself is part of New Zealand's heritage from the continent of Gondwanaland. Its ancient form was present in the area that eventually split off Aotearoa over 200 million years ago. The other members of the genus Agathis originated from the New Zealand form, so the Kauri is the most ancient member of the genus. To gain a perspective in this distant time from ours, I can only paint a picture in the mind's eye what it would be like looking out from this observation point. Looking out over the Firth of Thames, here I try fathom the volume of this fertile valley of birds, as the morning mists lift to reveal rolling plains lush with life almost as far as the eye can see from the rich volcanic soil. The mighty Waikato of its prime runs along its ancient course northward, tucking in close to Coromandel and taking a turn eastward out to the ocean, while the coastal land stretches onwards beyond Great Barrier Island. On a fine day from up here, one would be able to get a clear line north all the way to the horizon, seeing just a speck of coastline in the distance where the earth curves over the vast ocean. This handy geological map here will further convince the viewer on a similar date, as the material found on these 35-metre terraces is dated to the late Pleistocene. After digging deep into archives on the internet of geology reports in the area, all while getting familiar with the lingo, it was nice to get a confirmation on the subject to present on this video. This clay, with its malleable consistency and other interesting properties, is the medium that was used in this great masterpiece of antiquity. As if in some kind of twisted sense of fate, it was the craftsman god himself who prepped this canvas, as art chooses its medium.